if you want to send to the group that we're on. We are on Lamed Zayin with base 37B. Maybe one or B2. Let's take a look in a second. Morning, Ronnie. Morning, Ronnie. Welcome to town.
Good morning, Rabbi. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good to see you.
You too, Papa Shem.
Okay, so on 37B1, the last thing we said yesterday was if a person went ahead and he covered the fire before Shabbat and then the fire reignited, you're allowed to leave hot food on it. You're allowed to leave food that was totally cooked on it. Even I feel like even we said even these roast and coals, even these coals that are very strong coals that even when you extinguish them, a lot of times it still remains, the fire remains inside, and it's common that it's going to reignite. Nevertheless, you could go ahead and leave food on those coals since you showed that you have no interest in it. So the Gemara wanted to say, Shema Minam Islamik v'yafalo muta, and even though it said you can leave food that was fully cooked, but sounds doesn't say that the food is deteriorating, meaning it's getting worse as a result of the continued cooking. It sounds like even food that's going to improve, that's improving as the time goes, you can leave that food on that coal that reignited. So the Gemara wants to prove from there that we're not afraid that if food is fully cooked before Shabbat, morning Asaf, that you're not afraid you're allowed to leave that food on that fire. So the Gemara says it's not a proof because shiny halcha de katma. This is on the top of the page, top right column on 37B1. The only reason why you're allowed to leave the food there is maybe because you already showed you're not interested in the fire because you originally had put ashes on the fire to like diminish the fire. The fact that it reignited, you still once you show that you're not interested in it, we're not so concerned to say that you're not allowed to leave food that was fully cooked on such a fire. So the Gemara says, what is the chiddush? What are you telling me? What is the chiddush that you're telling me that you're allowed to go ahead and leave this? There's nothing. Morning, Mark.
Morning, Rabbi.
Morning. If you showed that you're not interested in the fire because you put the ashes on it to begin with, so what's the novelty by telling me that you can leave food that's fully cooked on such a fire since you already showed you're not interested? So the Gemara says, "Hoover it's rechlei." But you know what? The chiddush is, the novelty is that you're allowed to put food on such a fire, even though the fire rekindled itself, right? The coals that you had put the ashes on beforehand, the fire came back. Therefore, the chiddush is, the novelty is that even though in general maybe you wouldn't be able to put food that's fully cooked on a fire before Shabbat because it's on open fire because it's improving, and you might come to stoke it. But the novelty is, the chiddush is that since you already showed not interest in it by putting ashes on it to begin with, even though it reignited, you could go ahead and leave food that wasn't fully cooked. Even food that's improving as the cooking is going along. So the Gemara says, but that's the case, and the Gemara says, and Ma'odatim, you might have thought, Kivan the Huvura, once the fire came back, that it comes back to its original state. Or 1 second, the Gemara says, 1 second. So the Gemara says, Hoover, the chiddush is, the novelty is that even though the fire came back, you would have thought that if the fire comes back, you consider it like there was never ashes to begin with, because you see the fire came back. And yet we say that once you put the ashes on it, we don't the fact that the fire came back, it still helps that you can leave food that was fully cooked on such a coals on such a fire because you already showed that you're not interested in it. So the Gemara says, Hainu hach. We have that from before, from Rav Osha told us that before, that if you had a fire and you put ashes on it and then it reignited, you could leave food that was fully cooked. That's improving on that fire. So the Gemara says there's something novel here. The novelty is that even though it's coals that generally reignite, or coals that are very hard to extinguish the fire, so that you might have thought that the fact that you put ashes on such coals, if it reignites, the fact that it's common that reignites, maybe we would not look at the fact that you put ashes on it as if to show real disinterest in it when you know it's common to reignite, and therefore the novelty is that we still say the fact that you put ashes on it, it is considered like you have a certain level of removal from such a fire, and if once it's fully cooked, you can place it on that fire, even though it is improving as time goes along. Now, so the Gemara says like this, according to what Amar Rav Sheshet says like this. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the name Rabbi Yochanan. According to what we had before, Rabbi Yochanan allowed a person to leave the only allowance that he allowed to leave food on a stove, that if the stove is not, if you didn't remove the coals, right? If you didn't remove the coals and you didn't cover the coals before the Shabbat, it's only a food that's fully cooked, morning Ezra, food that's fully cooked, and it's going down in quality. As the longer it goes, it's going down. So therefore, we don't have to be afraid that you're going to go ahead and come to stoke it. Therefore, now the Gemara, that's how we had in Rabbi Yochanan until now. And now we're going to say, Amar Rav Sheshet Rabbi Yochanan, we have a different opinion in Rabbi Yochanan said, Kira shehisikuha begefet u'beitzim. If you have a stove that, let's say you have a stove and you heated it, let's say with the wood, let's say, and you didn't cover the fire, you didn't remove the coals, you didn't show that you're not interested in this fire. So this opinion says, Mashin aleha chamin, you're allowed to leave. Chamin shel huchmu kol tzarkom, v'tavshil shel bishul kol tzarkom. You could leave food on this hot water on this stove, even though it did not reach its full level of cooking. So here we're going back to the old argument. As long as it reached, let's say, 50% of cooking, do you say that good enough, right? So now the Gemara is meaning we have an old argument between the Chachamim and Hananya, between the rabbis and Hananya. The rabbis say it has to be fully cooked, and not only fully cooked, the Gemara introduced earlier that it also has to go, the opinion that said it has to go down, it's also be going down, and it's not improving. And now we have the opinion that said, and we have two opinions, right? What's the old argument? The old argument is food that's 50% cooked before Shabbat, can I put on an old flame or not? That's an argument of the early rabbis, of Tanoim. Now we're going to have to see how the later rabbis, who takes positions, who takes the position like the rabbis, who takes position like Hananya. So if we look at the later rabbis, then we can figure out what the law is, right? The early rabbis argue. Now the later rabbis have to tell us, we have to figure out who do they go like, and based on what they go like, we can figure out how we have to hold in halacha, correct? Does that make sense? We have the early rabbis, the later rabbis, and then there's us, right? We follow the later rabbis, what they hold. The later rabbis are obviously taking position in the early rabbis' dispute. So the Gemara says, even though it's not fully cooked, mashin aleh, you could go ahead and leave food on it. However, okar if you remove something from the, you remove something from the fire, excuse me, the fire is on, you can't put back on the Shabbat because we learned about that issue because it looks like you're cooking, right? Okay, if you remove something from it, lo yazir, you will not be able to ever put back food on a fire on Shabbat unless that fire is gone, unless the fire is out. You had removed the fire. Let's say it's Friday night. You it was very hot. It was hot. You heated it up, and then the fire. You remove the coals, and then you can put back on top of the stove. You can put back the pot because there's no fire. It doesn't look like you're cooking. Once if you want to put it back, can't be any fire there, or the fire has been diminished by you placing ashes on top of the coals, and the food is 100% cooked. So therefore, it doesn't look like you're cooking. Now, ksava. Now the Gemara says ksava matnitin. Our Mishnah is lahazitna. He holds that our Mishnah, he's taken the position that when the Mishnah says lo yitain, you cannot place unless you remove the coals. That means you can't return on the Shabbat unless the coals have been removed. But before the Shabbat, you could leave as long as it's 50% cooked. Even though, and therefore this Rabbi Yochanan is now we have on record one of the great later rabbis, Amoraim Rabbi Yochanan, who was a big rabbi in Israel, in the Holy Land. According to this version, that he holds you're allowed to leave food that's 50% cooked, and which is different than the other opinion in Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so the Gemara says, Amar Rava. Rava says we are now turning the page on 37b2. Amar Rava. So Rava says, Tarvayu Taninu. These two laws that Rav Shesha just recorded in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that you can leave food on a stove that's not fully cooked, as long as it's 50% cooked. We already learned these are two laws, and you can't put food back on the Shabbat unless the fire is not there. Tarvayu Taninu. We learned these two laws already. We learned Tanina, we learned in the Mishnah, we learned in the Mishnah earlier that if you want to put the bread into an oven before Shabbat, what did we say? You have to just make sure that it has enough time before Shabbat to crust. Because the bread can already crust at a certain level of edibility, if that's the right word. So therefore, once it reached that, before Shabbat, we're not afraid you're going to come stoke anything, because it's already, you're not so concerned about the food that you already come into the Shabbat knowing the food is already, ready to be eaten on a basic level. It's not fully baked yet. It says you cannot place bread into the Tana before Shabbat, and also lo charora al gabi b'chalim. The bread used to be on the inside of the oven. They would place the bread on the inside of the oven and stick it against the wall. They'd stick the dough against the wall. That's how they made the bread. So it says you can't place the bread inside the oven before Shabbat unless it has the time. And similarly, lo charora, like a certain cake, a thin cake that they would put on top of coals, unless the face of the bread or the cake could already crust before Shabbat. So then, ha karmu panel. But if it was, but what is the inference? If it was karmu panel, if it does take a crust, shari, it would be permitted. So we already know, and that means even though it's not fully baked. Similarly, we also learned in our Mishnah about the Hazir regarding returning, that you can't return something on an open flame, because Beitila says Af Malzirim. Beitila says you can even return something to the stove on Shabbat. If Beitila only allowed you to return something only El Begrufa Tuma. The case of Beitila said you can return something was when when you had removed the coals. But if it's not removed, Beit Hillel does not give you the allowance. So we learn from the Mishnah, itself, from the inference of the Mishnah of the Mishnah about the cakes, about the bread. We can learn it doesn't have to be fully baked before the Shabbat. And from the other Mishnah, we learned that you could go ahead and you can't return something on open flame. So what is the need for a sheshet to tell me these two halachot? Right? That is the Gemara's question. Now, really, you can ask on the Gemara's question, what do you mean? What is the need from telling us to halachot? I mean, we need to know his position. It's important to know what his position is in the halacha, right? We have to, we know we have a major argument between Chacham and Chananya. Can you leave food on something that's not fully cooked on a flame before Shabbat? So it is a great novel. It is something novel to tell me what Rabbi Yochanan holds on the deal. So what's the Gemara's question? What is he teaching us? He's teaching us that he's taking a certain position. So perhaps maybe the Gemara doesn't answer that. You hear my question? What's the Gemara's question? Rabbi Yochanan, what are you telling us? You're telling us you can leave food on something that's not fully cooked, fully baked. We know that from the Mishnah. But but there's two opinions in the Mishnah. There's two different opinions. I got to tell you what I hold. So when he's telling me something, he's telling me that he's taking a position, right? That was bothering me. I learned the Gemara yesterday morning. And I was thinking, but if he's just coming to tell us that he agrees with Hananya, he should have just said, I agree with Hananya. You don't have to tell me something in your name as if you're inventing something. If you're just saying me, you agree with it, so just say halacha Hananya, right? You don't just right. You don't. If you're telling me your own statement, what do you come and tell me something that's not just, you're not just telling me the laws like Hananya, just and then say it. So therefore he's come and tell me something. That's why I would like to, that's my approach. I'd like to answer what, but that's why the Gemara is asking the question. If you just come and tell us your position, just to say halacha, like the Gemara says, a lot of times there is halacha to this one. I hold like this opinion. Therefore the Gemara says there's something more that he's coming to tell us. So let's see if the commentary over here says anything. 37b2, the first column. Right, the first column toward the bottom of the page. Rav Sheshet Nami the Yuka de Matlisa Kamash Malan. So that's what I like to suggest. So the Gemara says, for Rav Sheshet Nami, the Gemara says, Rav Sheshet Nami, the Yuka de Matnitin Kamashbala. What is he coming to teach us? He's coming to tell us that how to understand the Mishnah earlier. Meaning the Mishnah stated that you have a right to, you could place bread in the oven before Shabbat as long as it crusts before Shabbat. And he's coming to tell us you could learn from that. He's coming to tell us that there is a inference from that Mishnah. He's coming to tell us that Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, the one who wrote the Mishnah, so Rabbi Yehuda Hanas, who organized the Mishnah. You could learn from that Mishnah our question. Meaning we have, if I just say the law follows this rabbi, right. If I would just, because a crusted bread is not completely cooked, it's just crusted. And that Mishnah, by the fact that the Mishnah just said just didn't bring an argument in the case. The Mishnah says if you have bread that crust, as long as you put the bread in before Shabbat, with enough time to crust before Shabbat, you're good. That means you could go ahead and that's fine. So the inference is that Mishnah is teaching us that if it even though but once it crusted, right? But once it crusted, and it's continuing to cook during Shabbat, continue to bake during Shabbat, you're fine. So that Mishnah, the Yuga de Manisa Kamash Malan, the Mishnah didn't say openly, but if it crusted, it's fine. It's obvious. It's an inference. The inference is if you can't place the bread unless it crusts. So it crusts, it's fine. And that's going to be a source, and that could be a source for us to allow bread, and that's going to be a source to teach us. That Mishnah is teaching us that the law follows Hananya. That Mishnah teaches us that the partial cooking, as long as it's 50%, is good enough. So that's what Rav Sheshet is telling us. He's telling us that that Mishnah is teaching us that that law. You make that inference, and that's a very big thing to tell us. That is the source for the law, right? He's telling us to infer that from the Mishnah, and we'll follow, and that's the inference, and that's the law. Tosfos is not satisfied with that shot because we don't need him to tell us. Tosfos is saying, if you look at the Tosfos, second Tosfos on the bottom, the Yukad Maslita Kamasha Pirish Rashi is telling us that Karmu Panel Shapidamid, as long as it took crusted, is good enough. So Tosfos says we don't need it. It's obvious. If the Mishnah states you can't put it in unless it crusts, obviously if it crusts, you could put it in. So he doesn't need to tell me. We don't need his. He need his. The inference is obvious. You don't need him to tell us that inference, unless you would say he's coming to tell us that is because of that influence. The law follows that opinion. But that was Hananiah's opinion. Is you don't need to be fully cooked, as long as Hananiah's opinion is just if it's 50% cooked. Good morning, Morris. That's good enough.
So Rashi hold that the halakha is like
right. So if you look at the Tosfot, Amar Rav Sheshet from the bottom, third Tosfot on the bottom on the right side. Amar Rav Yochanan Kira Shesuka Begefet the Beitza Masha Tavshal Bishakol Sarko. Right. See that Tosfot? It's right over here. Ezra, you see the Tosfot? Here's the Tosfot, Adam. Right? So this statement, right, Mark? Amar Rav Sheshet, Amar Rav Yochanan. Kira Shesiku, you got it? The Gefet of Beitzim. Mashanallah, you can leave on it. Tafshil, that was not fully cooked. Pasak Rabbeinu, good morning, Nathan. Boker Tov. He says you can leave on it. Pasak Rabbeinu Tam Halacha Kerab Sheshet and Rabbi Yochanan. The halacha is like Rav Sheshet named Rabbi Yochanan, that you can do this, you can leave on it, because the Ravas who is post Rabbi Yochanan, later Rabbi, the Amma Tarvaya Taninu, we learned both those laws. Seems that Rava is going like that opinion. Srile Kavote, he holds like him. V'chein Pasak Rashi, like Mark said, Rashi also says like that. The Stamat, the in the Perakama, the Mishnah in the first parak with the bread that we just quoted, it's written without any argument, as if this is the law. But there's an argument about it. So why don't you tell me? In fact, you tell me this is the law as long as it crust. Seems like that is the law, and that's how we follow. You can leave even if it's not grufa. But to return Vade asur, even if it's not allowed to return to an open flame, even if it's fully cooked, even if you asur, elam can garufa katum, unless you have the coals were removed. Feel a bishop circle, even if it's fully cooked, because it still looks like making a fire, doing a cooking. Now, in the Yalkut Yosef, they have a very nice edition here. This Saka edition. I don't know if that's what I'm saying his name right. The Saka edition, and he says, it's interesting if you look at the Shulchan Aruch itself. The Shulchan Aruch himself seems like that the Ashkenazim were more lenient, Sephardim were more strict, but nevertheless, he comes out that the main law is you could be lenient as long as 50%, but it's better to be strict. That's how he presents it. He says, okay. Listen, if it's better, I mean, you get extra blessing for the deal. You get something on the deal. It's not that you're just strict. You're strict and
supposed to be strict for the sake of being strict.
right. So here we're only being strict because there's other opinions, right? So here he says, he brings it the custom. He said like this. The custom of Sephardic Jews is to follow the first opinion and leave pots. Let's see if he has another. You see, he quotes here. It says the custom of Sephardic Jews. Here, listen to this. The Rif, as well as the Rambam, ruled according to the more strict opinion. And usually the Shulchan Aruch goes with if you have Rif, Rambam, and Rosh, 2 to 3. He goes with 2 to 3 usually. So we have Rif and the Rambam, big hitters, as they say, and they say you cannot leave food unless it's fully cooked and it's not, and it's getting going down, and it's getting worse. But the Rosh holds like Hananya, the more lenient opinion. The Shulchan Aruch followed the ruling of the Rambam, which is more strict, whereas the Ramah, the Ashkenaz opinion, followed the ruling of the Rabbeinu Osher, which is more lenient. There are some Sephardic communities that established the custom to follow the lenient ruling of the Ashkenaz rabbi, the Ramah, in this instance, and there is a basis to justify that custom. Even so, it is recommended to follow the ruling of the Rambam. Now, then he says on the bottom, but if everything is fully cooked before Shabbat and it's going down, it's not improving. Then you go according to everybody, right? So then he says. Then he says like this. So one thing that people do by the crock pot, meaning the people that are more, if you're more strict, if you take the more strict opinion, they put aluminum foil on the inside of the crock pot, so that covers the heating element. That's just like a blech. And meaning, and if you cover, if you do something to cover the heating element, like you put a tray, you put a sheet over the fire, that shows you're not interested in the fire. So you're not going to come to what's the issue? Right, but the question is, are you going? What's the concern? The whole concern is, am I gonna, if it's improving, if the crock pot, if the cholent is improving, am I gonna raise the temperature? Am I gonna do something? So if I put the same way on a stove, if I cover the fire with a piece of metal, I'm showing I'm not interested in doing anything to this fire. What is the point of that covering the fire? To show I'm not, it's going to remind me I'm not interested in. So therefore you could put any type of food you want on that fire before Shabbat, even uncooked, if the fire is covered. So too, the crock pot, but if I have this, if I put the aluminum foil inside, that's what many people do, and that maybe to fulfill that opinion. Now, he says, the only thing what it does, it reminds me and they also put the foil over the knobs, meaning it comes inside. They put it on inside the crock pot, and it comes down a little bit over the knobs. Now I'm good. I'm not going to touch the knobs. So I'm. What are you afraid of? I did everything before Shabbat. So now I definitely gained big on the deal by doing that. And if I take and once the food is fully cooked, if I pick up the crock to take out the inside, whatever, and I take out food, I can technically put back. If I'm we'll see certain conditions if it's fully cooked. I'm not putting it directly back on a fire because I already was covered. You know, all these opinions that say you can go ahead and leave food on a fire before Shabbat if it's not fully cooked, as long as 50% cooked. But once you take the food off, you never could put it back on because it's already, even if it's fully cooked, because you can't put a food on open flame. Right. Now, he talks about, he says over here, he says again, the custom of Sephardic Jews is to follow the first opinion, leave pots directly on the fire. The drawback in the practice that once it has removed the food from the fire on Shabbat, it's forbidden in all circumstances to put it back on. It is recommended, you got that, Mark? It is recommended that one always place a sheet of metal over the fire before leaving pots on it for Shabbat. Then one has the added advantage that even after moving the pot from the fire on Shabbat, you may put it back under certain circumstances, right? That's a big gain by having this metal covering your fire. That now, he says, all the above applies to leaving a pot on fire where it is possible to raise or lower its intensity. If one leaves food on an electric warming tray, right, Ezra, where one has no potential to raise the heat, so then there's no need to cover the surface with anything. You don't have to put aluminum foil on top of the. If one leaves food on an electric warming tray, where one has no potential to raise the heat, there's no different. It's only one setting, on or off. If you have that type of warming tray, then there's no need to cover its surface with anything. Why? The entire reason for covering the fire is to remind the person not to raise the heat, and that is not applicable with this warming tray. Even if one uses a warming tray with different settings, with different temperatures, if it is made specifically for Shabbat use and is not made for weekday cooking, the surface itself, then he's going to say the surface itself is considered to cover the heating element. Meaning you don't cook with this. If you have a type of thing, you don't, even if it has this is like a chidush, right? You have a warming tray, but you don't use it ever for cooking. During the week, you don't use it. It's only for Shabbat. Why are you using it on Shabbat? Because you can't cook on Shabbat. So he's gonna consider that even where's the fire in the warming tray? It's inside the tray, right? There's the heating element is inside, but the fire is not exposed. It's inside. There's the tray, it's inside. See, he'll consider that covered. That you actually would see it. It's exposed. You don't see anything.
Just like that.
Right. But that's right, exactly. That's called the normal way of cooking. Right. Therefore, one may place food. One say no one cooks if you don't use it during the week to cook. So therefore that's much better. That would be why you may place food directly onto a tray before Shabbat and leave it there until one wishes to eat.
Right.
One may leave food on it at any stage, whether it is completely cooked before Shabbat or half cooked, or even if the food has just began to cook, because we're treating the warming tray as if it's covered. The fire is covered. Fire is covered because there's no limitations about what you could do before Shabbat on such a thing. On Shabbat itself, right? So then we're going to see also what you could do, what you could place on this. Obviously, if something is not fully cooked, you can't place it on this warm. It's going to cook up. So Shabbat, that's going to be, he's going to have more discussion about the Shabbat, what you could do on the Shabbat. So that I think is, then he said, also he says, it's become quite common to place pots on electric warming tray, either the complete, that it should, that the postscript debated whether the tray has the status of, do we look at this, good morning, do we look at the tray as if it's covered? Do we look at this heating element that's inside the tray as if it's really covered? Well, that's not really, you didn't really do anything to show that you're not interested in cooking with this heating tray. This is the norm, that this is how it works on a regular basis, right? Usually we always, and it could, if it has potential to cook food, right?
It could make it more, it could improve.
Right. But he says debate is not relevant to those warming trays that can be turned only on or off, but not higher or lower. But if it's only on and off, you could put food on that tray before Shabbat. That's
During Shabbat.
and during Shabbat, again, with certain right, and during Shabbat as well, with certain, but if it's no, during Shabbat, if it has to be fully cooked, right? You don't want to, right? During the Shabbat, it has to be fully cooked. The debate is pertinent to concerning those warming trays with controls enabling the user to raise or lower the temperature. Can I put food before Shabbat on something, meaning to say, is it Morioni? Is that considered? Is it like I'm putting it on an open fire? Or he says debate, meaning, am I concerned? Am I going to come raise the fire? Meaning, I don't know much about the warming drawers. But
no, it's only an aluminum box. You don't see any.
so it's like a warming tray. It sounds like a warming tray. It has a just rest. So that is.
It really doesn't cook anything. The only thing it can do is dehydrate the food.
So I would say it would sound like if to cover those knobs before, if it has adjusting thing to cover those, if there's a way to cover, if there's the knob that could adjust it higher or lower, that definitely would make things better. Or put a sign Shabbat, it's Shabbat, right, to remember. Okay, I thought you would appreciate this.
Very good.
Yalkut, it's in English. It's also in English. They did a good job. Have a great. They have many volumes right there, right next to Mark. Also, I looked up Mark's question yesterday. It is subjective. The Chafetz Chaim says it is subjective. It depends whether it's better for you. If the food is getting, if you leave the food, but for you, it's not better. The more is it called how the world looks at it or how you look at it? It's more about you. We'll see. I want to show you because it's all about you raising the temperature or not raising the temperature. So if the food is getting worse for you, you don't like it. You like it. You don't like it crispy. So then you're not going to adjust it.
No, but that's
Right.
in my family.
So then, if there's other members that could touch it, then you have to worry. But if the wife only deals with the food, you don't touch the food. So it's all with how she like and how she would deal with it, how she considers the food. She's the boss of the food, and then you don't touch it. You stay out of the kitchen, right? Right there.
I have to learn.
Right.
Fish up. That kitchen fish up.
Exactly. You
I have to take that class. Stay out of the kitchen class.
imagine if she wants to get involved in your business.
But she does it all the time. Well, we run to work. She tells me stay out of my kitchen, otherwise I'm so much more.
Everybody has to have their space. And we have to
Good belief.
and we have to respect each other's space.